Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Burlington and Beyond. Tonight we have some special guests with us. We're going to take a break from town meeting and go right to the election in November. And we're going to explore tonight question number 3, which is known as, Keep Massachusetts Safe, and otherwise also known as the bathroom bill. This will be an effort to repeal the bathroom bill, which was pushed through the legislature, I think, year and a half ago. I think our own Ken Gordon was part of that. Anyway, tonight we have with us, to my immediate right is our co-host, Joan Kennedy. She was in Burlington. She has moved on to Reading, is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, Larry.
Great. We're sorry to lose you, but thank you for joining us again tonight.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for having me, Larry.
And then we have next to Joan is Debby Duggan, a homemaker,
Yes.
but you're also heading up the No on 3 campaign, am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
Great.
Yes.
And Deedee, Dorrington,
Okay.
thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
You're from Billerica.
Correct. Yep. Just right up the
And,
street.
You describe yourself as a community activist.
Yeah.
When there's
I
some
think
issues,
that's fair.
you'd like to make sure that the community is aware of what we're voting on
Yes.
and making
yeah.
sure that they're aware of the consequences. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Well, great. Before we get into a little introduction, I was wondering if we could just go take an overview of the bill, but I would like to get into your backgrounds as to why you're supporting this effort, a little bit about yourselves, and lead into why you're supporting this effort to repeal what's known as the bathroom and
Locker room
locker room.
law.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. The law that we are objecting to is was passed in July of 2016, and it is a public accommodations law that allows or prevents from discrimination for certain individuals. And it also allows men in these lady spaces that are private, such as the law initially, excuse me, let me backtrack just a little bit. I'll go all the way back to the first law. The first law was in 2011, and that prevented discrimination in hotels and restaurants and those type of venues. They did not include those spaces that are more private for women, such as bathrooms, locker rooms, changing rooms, even women's shelters. So now this law that was passed 2 years ago and has been in place for 2 years now allows any man who identifies as a woman or holds a sincerely held belief that he is a woman may go into those spaces and use those spaces.
And is that translated into however they want to, however they feel that night may
Correct.
allow them to
Correct.
choose their
Yes.
bathroom of
Yes.
choice? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. The standard is a sincerely held belief. Is what the law states.
Yeah.
Why did they move from an actual, which sex to how they feel? Why did they change from the actual to how somebody feels as being the whether they're allowed in a restroom or not?
I wasn't involved in writing the law, so I don't know how that quite came to be, but it's...
And do people really feel it's more important how somebody feels about themselves? Which can change daily, as we all know.
Right. Good point.
That's more important than who we actually are?
Yeah, I guess you'd have to ask the people who proposed this law and passed it.
It's a difficult
we'll have to
question
do
to
that.
answer.
That's
Yeah.
a tough
We should
one.
do
That's
that.
a
We
tough
should
one.
try and ask that question.
Well, and I think the law was brought forward by, kind of a left-wing leading a group of people, and I think they had everybody's best interest in mind when they wanted to pass legislation. I don't think they intended to hurt anybody at all, but I think in doing so, they kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. I think, having the legal definition now, sincerely held belief, I've done a ton of research, and that, even when the guidelines came out, the state clearly admitted, and I have it here and highlighted, that they don't know how they're going to prosecute that case law will have to evolve as we move forward with these laws. And I think those kind of admissions, I think in retrospect, they don't help anybody at this point, because we're at a position right now where even the group of people that they're trying to protect, and we agree need protection, are not doing so. And I think one of the main problems that we've seen with this law is that when this law was brought to the table, many amendments were offered by the other side. In other words, they tried to bring compromise to this law. And, one of the amendments was to preclude sexual predators, convicted sexual predators, from gaining access to these women's spaces. But they allowed that to pass through as well. So there's certain things that when you start peeling back the onion, people find out that, wow, this really probably isn't good for anybody, and it's not safe for anybody. And that's what people don't understand, is that, when they hear the law or they first hear about it, they automatically go to the thought of stalls. Well, there's a stall involved. It's not a big deal. But the point is once people understand that it includes locker rooms, it includes shower areas, it includes changing rooms at Targets, that they're starting to feel more vulnerable with the fact that predators will take advantage of the very ambiguity in the law, that it's the way it's written.
Would this law include high schools?
Schools have their own separate sessions, as their own set of rules and regulations. We don't want to get into that. I can tell you, though, that
So currently high schools are not affected by the law that we're talking about repealing?
Correct.
they're not
Yes.
affected by the law, but they do have similar rules and regulations within the school system. But that's really not for us to talk about right now. But the law itself doesn't include them because they have their own set.
Okay. Could I ask you to get into your backgrounds a little bit, and then what brought you to question 3? Or no on
So
question
let's start
3?
with Debbie first.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Deb.
My history, I'm a homemaker and a mother, grandmother. My history has always been, I volunteered in lots of different areas that affect women and children. I was, if you've ever heard of the organization called La Leche League, it's mother-to-mother help with breastfeeding. I did that like 40 years ago, and so I did those kinds of things, PTOs. I was a library board of trustee member. I was a school board member for many, many years in New Jersey, and I helped write and pass 2 different pieces of legislation. One actually, what School to Work was the predecessor to Common Core, which is a very hot topic these days. And New Jersey's interpretation of School to Work was to have all 8th graders identify a career cluster for themselves. And so then everything would be geared toward that career cluster for those 4 years. And the last 2 years of high school, they would actually be in school 2 days a week and in the workplace 3 days a week. And so this is more like a vocational program, but it was for all students in the public school system in New Jersey. And we really felt that that was a decision that the students and the parents should be making if they wanted their child in a vocational program, not the state. And not all those career clusters were even available in different counties in New Jersey. So we were very successful in finding a good sponsor, taking it to people and going out and educating people in the state about, and parents about what this law was, and eventually it passed. And the other law that I was involved with had to do with, we called it the Nosy Student Survey Bill. Because schools are not supposed to administer surveys of students unless parents are notified, and they give parental permission to do so. And this occurred in a school in Ridgewood, New Jersey, which is a very affluent community, and there were a couple of parents, many parents, who were very upset about it. And so we were successful in getting that law passed too, that they must notify parents, because you cannot administer these tests to children and ask them about their home life. It's not the school's business. It's not whoever is, whoever wrote the survey. So
Debbie,
those are kind of my backgrounds. I was involved in.
would it be fair to summarize by saying you've been very active in women's issues and, let's say, parental issues?
Yes. And since I've lived here in Massachusetts, I have been involved with my Republican town committee. I've been an election commissioner, and I am a Republican state committee
Sorry about that.
woman.
Which town Republican committee?
Watertown.
Watertown.
I live in Watertown, yes.
Is that an active committee there?
It is, indeed. We're very active.
Well, she's here.
We're
the
looking
ring.
in Burlington to become more active. The problem is people are always moving out of town, and a couple of them are deceased on us.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
sad.
That happens, yes. It's, people are busy. People are busy, and so it's just one more thing, but it's a very important thing to do. It's so important for us as citizens to understand how our government works and to be involved, to be educated and informed, and to vote.
If you
right.
believe in something, to work for what you know to be correct.
Correct. Absolutely.
Maybe we could use your help in Burlington.
Sure.
Appreciate that. Now, how did you get involved with the question 3? The 913?
I had helped a couple of years ago with the signature drive. Once the law was passed, there was a small opportunity of time to get the appropriate number of signatures to get it on the ballot.
Okay.
And the signature drives are conducted just throughout the state. They needed, I think, 33,000 to get on the ballot, and they gathered about 55,000. It's called raw signatures, so they're not, they haven't been certified yet.
Right.
So what they do is they collect all these different petitions. They gather them together in the office, and they come from all different communities throughout the state.
Cities and towns
Yes,
throughout the
absolutely,
Commonwealth,
yes. And when you gather these signatures, where like at a grocery store or outside a post office, sometimes people are in a hurry, especially like at the grocery store. So they don't say, oh well, I can stand and talk about this issue. But if you tell them what it is, and then they sign, you may not have time to shuffle through your papers and find Burlington. So you just start a new sheet, and you write Burlington on it, and you let them sign it. And so now you have Burlington. You may only end up with one signature from Burlington on that specific petition. So when all of those are gathered together, then they're all sorted according to which city or what town. And then when the collection stops, there's a certain date that you have to stop collecting signatures, and you have to get them to the town clerks or the highest election official in the different cities or in the town. And then they certify those signatures. So they go through the list of voters, and they look for the name and the address, and if they are an active voter, or if they're inactive, or if maybe they've moved. And sometimes people just sign to make you happy.
Right.
And
they don't want to admit that they're not a registered
and they're not
voter.
even a registered voter. But that's, I think their intentions are good, but
I'm sure.
it doesn't count. So, and then we're notified by the different towns. We go around, we pick them up, and then we collect them all again, and then by whatever date it is, they take them to the State House.
And so what was this question you were gathering signatures for?
At the time, we were calling the campaign Keep Mass Safe. And since this summer, since July, we got our number. There are 3 questions on the ballot, and we are number 3. So then our campaign became No on 3, because that's how we want people to remember us.
Okay. Well, thank you for that explanation.
You're welcome.
Sounds like a very rich, active past, and very involved in the issues. That's great.
Thank you.
Deedee, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, it's not quite as impressive as Debbie.
Different type of impressive.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
I grew up in a small town in New Hampshire and live in Billerica now. A homemaker as well. I've raised 2 sons, and just always, when they were younger, I was always involved in school or church at the time. So I was always active. And then as they grew up, I got involved a little bit more politics, or if there's an issue in town, there was an issue of bus safety, I kind of latched on and helped people, even though, I have no active role or title, I'm still willing to help. There was another ballot question a few years ago that I was town captain for, and that was about animal safety, and being humane to animals. So I think what really drew me to this is, I don't know. I caught wind of it on social media. I knew, I have some friends, and I have a friend who is a representative, and we were talking about this law passing, and I started looking into it then, and when I found out it passed, I also found out there was a very short window to help collect with the signature gathering. So I just kind of went all out and said, I've got to do my part because of the concerns of the safety issue that really led me into it.
So your initial reaction to this bill was, this is dangerous and we need to do something about it.
This is not safe. This is not safe for women. It's not safe for young girls, and it's not safe for the people who they were trying to make it safe for. And again, it's going back and peeling the onion and really understanding that.
Debbie, do you believe that same way, that it's not safe? This makes us less safe as a community?
Absolutely, absolutely.
In particular women?
Yes. Because it allows men in these spaces that should be private and safe, and there's no one at the door who checks your thoughts, and thank goodness there's no such person, but we don't know their intentions, if they're good intentions or bad intentions. And because this law was so poorly written, it has a number of loopholes in it that allows anyone to identify that day as a woman and go in and use these women's spaces.
So could it work in the inverse? And so by way of example, say, okay, my name's Joan, but if I presented myself as Charles and I attempted to get into a male restroom, where there's urinals and there's stalls,
Right.
and I presented myself as Charles, if I was challenged by someone in the restroom, in the male restroom, I could just say, I'm sorry, but I sincerely hold my identity to be Charles.
Correct.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
if a local police officer found me in the men's room, somewhere between the stalls and the urinals, self-identifying as Charles, that officer could do nothing to
Correct. Yes.
to remove me from the premises
Right.
there, as I stayed there for however long.
Right.
Is there a loitering?
No,
Is there
you
any
can-
time limitation for being
No.
in the locker room or the bathroom or the dressing room?
Well,
No.
there's not. Yeah.
So I can be a sincerely held belief that my name is Charles and just loiter in the men's room
For as long as you choose.
as long as I choose,
As long as you don't touch anyone or do anything illegal.
like photograph them
Correct.
or stick
Yes.
a camera under
Right.
the stall and photograph them.
Right.
Well, and that's happening a lot, we don't want to come across as, target bashing, but when you look at the Keep Mass Safe website and you do look, there's a whole slew of instances where people have gained access, and a lot of them are in targets, because no one's taught to look anymore. And I shared a couple of stories that I think are a little bit important.
Before we get there, could you just mention that website again, just for people at home, so that they know
It's
this website
keepmasafe.org.
spelled exactly the way it sounds?
Yeah,
No
Keep
spaces,
Mass,
just
right.
keepmasssafe.org.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
no, that's fine. I think a really important part of this is that because of the law, the way it's written, and because, if someone were to question someone, now the burden of proof is on the questioner. In other words, if I were to question your presence, and
You
you were
challenge the
offended.
individual.
Exactly. At this point, I'm opening myself up to litigation as well as substantial fines. So because of this, people are being taught to look away. And it was during the petition phase, because I know Debbie said that it's a very quick process where, you know, you get the signature and you move on, I tend to chat. And I like to talk with people, well, because I like to hear where their concerns are and present my concerns. And sometimes we match up and sometimes we don't. But that's okay. But it's part of the education process moving forward if you really want to promote an issue one way or another. So I was talking to this young girl, and the place that she worked at knew this law was coming, and she was told by her employer, she worked at a movie theater, that if she were to see a gentleman like yourself walk into the ladies' facility, she is to just look the other way. You know, she's not to bring attention to that, because then the company she works for is then open up to litigation. And you know, and then California, I know, passed similar laws, and I came across this blog and it's very powerful, and I do a lot of work on social media, and I share this to a lot of people, and when they read it, they kind of start thinking along some of the lines I'm asking them to think along. And that is this woman who you know, considered herself very progressive, very liberal. She was a mother, and she knew the law was happening in California and it was coming down the pipe, and you know, she didn't really think anything of it until she was at Disneyland with her friends and their children, and she was in the ladies' restroom with the children around her, and all of a sudden a man came in, and he wasn't looking confused, he wasn't looking for his daughter, he wasn't looking for his grandmother. He literally just stood there in defiance. And all of the women, they just kind of, they looked at each other and they knew they felt uncomfortable. They knew the situation wasn't right. Mothers who had their infants on the changing table were kind of trying to, you know, to block the view. And that stayed with her. And I think the message with that is that when we adopt laws like this, we teach women and we teach children we have to look away. And that if we're separating boundaries and we're not creating safe boundaries for them anymore, then they're not even going to pay attention to their instincts, that if something's wrong, if something doesn't feel right, you can't speak up anymore. And I think that's a real huge issue with this, that, you know, when you look at safety and you look at privacy and you look at the necessity of boundaries, it makes it all go away, and we're forced to not look at it.
Deedee, this is amazing, only because when you're on mass transit and you're in the commuter rail stations, and the MBTA as well, they have the see something, say something, and these signs are like flashing as you're waiting for your train or your subway train or your commuter rail. And so see something, say something applies to all general citizens, male and female, or anybody who's, you know, sentient and can read the sign from age 12 onward. But for women and children, put up and shut up.
Well, and if you look at the Me Too movement, the Me Too movement is all about
empowering women.
Exactly, and this does everything opposite of that. You know, it teaches us that we have to accept things that make us uncomfortable. And I've mentioned before that, you know, as women, and, you know, I'm sure if you have women in your life, you've drilled this into them like it's been drilled into us. Always be safe. Look at your surroundings. You know, keep your keys in your hands. Look in the back seat before you get into your car. And now we're going to open up a door into a restroom. We don't know what's lurking behind that. And I've had two very reliable people tell me that this has happened to them locally, that they were in a restroom where they thought they were safe and a man was in there. Now, thank goodness nothing had happened to them. You know, they did leave. Everything was safe. But the comfort level was, it just wasn't there. They were just so uncomfortable, they were so taken aback, and they couldn't understand why this person was in a space where years ago we could have questioned them and said, you know, did you go into the wrong door by accident, you know, and now we don't have that freedom to do that.
All we can really ask is, what are you thinking?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, actually, even asking that question, now the questioner becomes the
Well,
person
you're
that's
making sure
subject to
that
liability,
they
because
pick-
that
they pick the
individual
right
could
role.
in turn be potentially sued by the Attorney General's office or some other local governmental entity, a police department potentially, or the district attorney's office, for engaging in a civil rights infraction for challenging the person that came into the restroom.
Right.
Now, if it's someone who's truly transgendered, who is making their level best effort to look
Absolutely.
like Amelia instead of Andrew, I mean, you know, there's grace and space for that individual to be in the space. But if it's for someone who's clearly male, who's stepping into that environment to humiliate and to control and to belittle women and children, this is problematic.
Well, and
What about women who've been sexually abused? I mean,
This triggers them,
It
yes.
does. It
Oh, yes.
absolutely triggers them, and it's not something that they recover from in just a couple of days. This can trigger them and set them down a path for a long time to recovery again, because it brings back to mind all those bad experiences.
So the way this law is written, do you feel that we are less safe in this state?
Women are, and children are.
Do you know of any woman that feels safer because of this law?
Do I personally know of any women?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
And do you, Deedee? Anybody feel safer because of this?
Absolutely not that I know of. In fact, and I know we've stressed this, and I have experience with this, that when I was on the petitioning phase again, I talked with someone who was in stage of transitioning, and I explained to them exactly the detail that as I understood it, and that person didn't like it. They felt vulnerable themselves because the very thing that they were trying to escape could so easily follow them. Any kind of harassment or discrimination could actually very easily follow them, because the law clearly states it's only a sincerely held belief, and that people don't even have to change their appearance to be protected under this law. And that says something right there for everybody's vulnerability.
So in order to pass this law, they made it far too overbroad, and they wouldn't exclude certain categories. I think you touched on it previously, that during the creation initially of this law that passed most recently in 2016, in the creation of the law, there were certain groups and entities that said, well, let's keep people who are sexual predators, like level 1, level
Right.
2, level 2, and level 3 sex offenders, from not being able to access restrooms, female
Correct.
locker rooms, and female dressing rooms. And regrettably, that didn't come to pass. So the law is overbroad.
Correct. Well, and it's funny too, because, well, it's not really funny.
It's ironic.
Ironic that over the summer, when I was kind of putting my feelers out there, and again, I do a lot on social media, because I feel like I have a good understanding about what's important to people, especially if they're opposed to repealing this, and I like to listen and find out and really measure what's important. And I actually got a threat. I got a threat online that I had to take very seriously. So I went to my local police station in Billerica, and while I was waiting there to report it, and the comment that got me threatened was when I said that men can access these spaces now, and that sexual predators can access these spaces, level 1, 2, and 3. And this person didn't believe it, and all of a sudden they had to threaten me. And while I was sitting in the lobby, I looked up, and on the sex registry board was a picture of a person who appeared male, dressed as a female, as a registered 3 sex offender, but he had a wig and a hat on. And that person is allowed and protected under these laws to be able to gain access into women's spaces because of his self-identification. And I couldn't make this up, that in one hand, here I am explaining the law and its dangers. I'm receiving a death threat, and then I'm looking at the very person that I'm trying to protect everybody from.
Well, yeah, because the person who is a sexual predator, you don't even know who his victim of choice is. It could be men, it could be women, and it could be children. It could be all three, potentially. That's the nature of sexual predators. Some of them are very broad with regard to their choice of victims. And so for the person who's truly transgendered, that was Andrew, and has taken painstaking steps to
Right.
become Amelia, and now tries to go into a female restroom just to wash her hands and use the stall and get out quickly and adjust her hair and whatever. She now is at risk with that sexual
Exactly.
predator
Yes,
who may attack her as
absolutely.
well.
Exactly.
And that's part of our messaging. We say women, and we say children, and we say other vulnerable people, and those are the
Including
people.
the transgendered individuals.
Absolutely. This law has not done them any favors at all.
It denigrates their experience.
Yes.
Well, and that's a whole other subject, but I hear
Yeah.
what you're saying as far as that's concerned. We could do a whole show on that, but really the messaging today is that what needs to happen first is this needs to be repealed. We need to put safety and privacy back into these spaces and let our legislators then hear the information that obviously a no vote would give them, that they need to do better, that they need to offer protections for everybody. They need to take a step back and put the baby back in with the bathwater,
So
and
A
see what
vote-
we can do.
A vote no on question 3 doesn't mean you dislike certain groups and entities.
No.
No basically says to the state legislature, go back and do it right this time.
No, I do not like this law. And it's interesting, too, because where Debbie and I had done that last show, I put it out on social media. I also have a home in Falmouth, so I put it out in Falmouth, and because I thought, again, it was very good dialogue, it was a very good explanation, and time and time again, oh, you're hateful, you're hateful, you're hateful, you're hateful. And one person who actually was very liberal, and I could tell by her response, she took the time to watch the show that we were on, and she said, I do not see 1 ounce of hate in you. People need to really understand that the message is about safety, it's about compassion, it's about privacy. Respect. There's absolutely no hate in this message. And for her to take the time to watch a half-hour show and to come across and to really understand that that's where we're coming from. We're coming from a place of including everybody to be safe, even yourself. If you have a granddaughter and she's in a situation where you want to protect her, if she's in a bathroom or you're waiting for her at a dressing room and you want to protect her, you're not safe trying to protect her, because now you could become the person who would be liable for litigation or for substantial
Or
fines.
civil rights infraction, because you can be considered, guilty of a hate crime by challenging someone who's clearly of the wrong gender and making no attempts to be transgendered,
Right.
to be in the physical space to intimidate
Right.
and humiliate
Right.
people or potentially attack them.
Right. This is about predators. This is about sexual predators. This is about people who are perverted, And also the other thing, when you talk about has a crime been committed, has he touched her, has he photographed her, those things don't have to happen to make a woman uncomfortable. Just simply being stared at is enough to make us uncomfortable. Just having the male anatomy exposed to us in an inappropriate way can make us uncomfortable. And all of these things can happen in a locker room or a shower area at the gym.
I guess that would be the part that I'm concerned with the most. I mean, for as long as I can remember, the women's room was always a safe zone. So it's almost like if they've taken that away, then was that intentional? Is that what they were trying to go for? Were they trying to make women more fearful by passing this?
very difficult to
or did they just not
understand what-
even think of that?
Yeah.
Are they intentionally trying to make women feel
I don't
more
think so.
dangerous?
I think it was
Were they
tunnel
really
vision.
trying to do
I-
women some help?
I think what happens a lot at the State
Assistance?
House that we see all the time is people don't want to work together. There's tunnel vision. There was an agenda to push this through. There was no
I
reasoning
think that's
that
what
went.
it was. It was an agenda.
Yeah.
And so what was that agenda? I only come back to they're wanting to make people feel less safe.
I think they wanted everybody safe, but they didn't understand the consequences of what this law and the ambiguity that it brings actually does for us as a people.
But there were a lot of people that were fighting this.
Oh, yes,
And
yeah.
there were testimonies, I did not testify, but there were testimonies that talked about the scenarios and what could happen. So, I wonder that all the time. I say, what was their agenda? Why did they do this? Because the very people that they profess to protect are far more in danger than they were before. And, people will ask, they'll say, well, okay, if you repeal this law, well, where are those people going to go to the bathroom then? And they're going to go to those spaces, those bathrooms, those places that they feel most comfortable in, that they had been using prior to this. And one of the amendments that was proposed, Deedee talked about the sexual predator amendment, but there was also another one that was proposed, and it was to protect the police so that if they were called and they responded to a call in good faith, that they would not be charged with a civil suit. And the other amendment is,
That was defeated too?
it was, yes.
So the police, when they're called to a target dressing room or a restroom, because someone is attempting to make photographs of women as they disrobe in the dressing rooms, they are in the stalls by slipping a camera under there or a cell phone.
Right,
They have
The
to be
police
very
can't.
careful.
Oh gosh.
yes.
So
Yeah.
it's circumscribed. It
It
handcuffs them.
it does
It
this
ties
to the
their hands.
police.
Gosh golly, that's horrible too, because
And then the other amendment was, and Larry, you alluded to it, or maybe Deedee was talking to you, if, say, you were at a Target and your granddaughter had to go and use the restroom and you waited outside for her, with this law, there was an amendment to allow you to go into that space and make sure that she was all right. But that was wasn't voted out of favorably. That wasn't amended. Yeah. So it's so there were things that they tried to put in place that would protect women and children, that would protect the police officers, that would protect businesses, and that would protect families, parents.
That would possibly put a little bit of sense into the bill.
A little bit.
Yeah. Have you been able to answer that question? What was the agenda? What was their agenda? What was their thinking?
No.
What do they think they're helping?
I don't.
And
I
come
don't
up with
know.
an answer?
I don't.
It just seems like everyone is a little bit more afraid now.
Right. I mean, I've tried to like wrap my brain around it, and it just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. And I mean, I just, in my lifetime, I turned 70 next year, and I never would have thought that I would see this in my lifetime, where what was once right is now wrong, and what was once wrong is now right. And I just think that, you know, it's time for the citizens, the voters, to come out and say, no more, Beacon Hill. You're not going to do this to us. You know, I really believe that the primary responsibility of every government is to protect us, be it on a local level, you know, safe streets, safe drinking water, police departments, fire departments, you know, and all those other things that they put in place to protect us. Well, Beacon Hill, I don't think understands that any longer, because this is bad for women, and it's bad for children, it's bad for businesses.
My feeling is that it was almost, and again, I'm going to link this in with some other national issues, but where we had a summer of last summer, not this one that just passed, of a lot of cops being murdered outright, where we had black people roaming the street and hitting white people and saying that's for Trayvon. And this was all being encouraged, and people were acting like, you know, you should go out and do this. And in other words, we should all feel terrorized. The rise of Antifa. It seemed like it was all one effort to make everybody feel a little less safe, you know, that's the way they wanted us. And that way, I don't know, maybe the government would step in and say, we're the answer to your safety. Everyone feels unsafe, well, rely on us, the government. That's the only thing I can make sense out of this. It just seems to fit with other aspects of what was going on in society. Do you feel it could be part of that they're trying to make everybody feel unsafe?
I don't want to think it's,
disagree,
I don't want to think it's as dark as that. I really, I think the people that brought this forward, again, I think their intentions were one-sided. I think they were focused on only one aspect of this law and only one aspect of who needed to be kept safe. And I just think that they were just tunnel vision. I think, you know, in retrospect, I would like to think that, you know, after thinking it through and kind of really understanding the points that we're bringing forward, that maybe, you know, in the conscience they think, you know what, you know, they're not going to say it publicly, but if it does come back to them, if we are successful in saying, no, we do not like this law, that common sense might prevail. I mean, there have been instances that have happened in Massachusetts where, you know, where women have been targeted. And, you know, there's one in Plainville, there was one in Hanover, there was one in Bellingham. So we do have instances where these things have happened, and we don't even know what else has happened. Because, again, when you're talking about crime, it doesn't have to include an assault. It doesn't have to include picture taking. You know, it can just be the mere, you know, exposure or staring at somebody. So a lot of things may be going underreported at this point. So I don't want to think in a very negative way that that they were trying to make people unsafe. I think they just, again, and I love this phrase, they threw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think having a chance to bring it back and to listen and to truly understand some of the concerns and see some of the things that have happened, that we can come together with something that everybody's going to be happy with. because that's the bottom line. We
So
all want to be safe.
The No on Question 3 group basically just wants to send it back to the state legislature for a do-over.
Yes.
It needs to be
Yes.
rewritten and
Exactly,
redone because
yep.
it's overly broad and
Overly
it
broad.
doesn't protect anyone.
Right,
And
well-
it doesn't even help the group that was supposed to be most benefited by this,
Well-
those who are truly transgendered and are truly transitioning. It does allow the sexual predators in there, and that's just plumb ridiculous.
Right, and the thing is too is when you think about a criminal, what are they going to do? They're going to find any weakness they can. I mean, we're
You look for
constantly
the vulnerable victim.
Well,
Yes.
not
You look
only
for the-
that, they look for a vulnerable law or the writing. You know, like how do they get our credit cards? You know, we do a chip and then they find something else, and now we got to do something else to protect ourselves. They're always one step ahead of us. So again, it's not
Criminals are
anybody who's
cunning.
truly transitioning. It's the predators and the people who look to subvert the law, and that's the thing that we're really trying to drive home is that even the state itself says in the guidelines that a person can be one gender at home and present as a different gender at work. And if someone's living that lifestyle, well then they're living that lifestyle. But that right there just opens up the ambiguity that you could be a male here, but if you go home you're female. And again, when you accept that gender fluidity as legal standard and you accept sincerely held belief as legal standard, that's when you get into problems.
How would you rewrite this law? To me, it just seems like it was just a bad idea, bad concept. But if you say that your objective of No on 3 is to send it back to the legislature, how would you change the wording to make it acceptable?
I really don't know that I could answer that, but I think that the law that was passed in 2011 protected people against discrimination, and I think that was their original intent. And this law goes too far. And so I don't...
What's the
but I
difference
don't-
between those two laws? If you
Because
could
they
help me out with
included in the public accommodations, they included the bathrooms, the locker rooms, the changing rooms, the women's shelters. That was a very brief, part of what changed
that. Okay,
that
so
made it less safe for us.
we're just looking to change the recent additions to the non-discrimination law.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, well, that seems totally reasonable.
Mm-hmm. I mean, no one should be discriminated against.
That's
I mean,
true.
we should not be,
And nor should
discriminated
anyone
against.
feel less safe because the law has been passed.
Absolutely. And the messages it sends to our daughters is awful. That if you feel unsafe, you can't say anything about it.
And we teach our children, our young sons and our young daughters when they're little, don't talk to strangers and to stay away, and stranger danger, and all those sorts of messages that they're initially taught when they're 5, 7, 9, and
Right.
11 and 13. But when your daughter is 15 and she's in a locker room or a dressing room or, a restroom, she's not allowed to say anything. And if she does, she may be construed as a bigot, which is unfortunate if
Well,
she
that's-
feels uncomfortable in that environment. Because someone who's truly transgendered is not going to come in and stare and wait for half an hour for individuals to come and go. They don't want to be that way either. Someone who's transgendered is truly trying to embrace their opposite gender, and they've made they've taken pains typically to do that, whether they've done it surgically or through cross-gender hormones, but they're choosing a different name, they're changing their driver's license. Every day they're putting themselves out again as I am now Charles, I'm no longer Joan, and I'm speaking with a deep voice, and I'm walking bow-legged, and I'm not wearing makeup, and I'm not wearing heels, and I am now Charles. That's my
Right.
iteration. And I'm not there to offend other people that are using the restroom when I walk in there presenting as Charles, because that's what I think is truly my gender. So this doesn't even help the people it was supposed to
No.
I agree with you.
in the first instance.
Because it just makes it a state of mind now. It's simply legally a
Sincerely
state of
held
mind.
belief, and that's so vague and overbroad. The only time that's going to get challenged is a deposition or a court hearing, a court proceeding, direct across.
But even that, I have it highlighted here where the courts, they clearly say that the case law hasn't been held for sincerely held belief.
In this
that-
context, right?
Yeah, and that, I hope it's, I mean, it's sad that case law is being developed because the crime has been committed, and the whole thing is to prevent these crimes from being committed in the first place, and I think, when you think about the young girls, is that, they come to a stage where they just don't feel right being in front of a boy and changing in front of them. I mean, that's a natural, it's an innate feeling, and we're telling and having to tell girls they have to squash that. They have to take those wiggy feelings and put them aside, and that's just not safe, because we're supposed to be creating boundaries and safe spaces so that when these innate feelings are there, that they can go with them.
So in order to have bodily integrity and to basically feel safe in your own body, and we're basically teaching young women and children to disregard that in case someone else's feelings get hurt, which is horrible, because the reason why we all have instincts is to preserve ourselves. The instinct for self-preservation is fundamental to everyone. Yeah, it is overbroad.
The other thing I'm concerned with is, or maybe just laugh at a little bit, is that if you feel sincere, then you can choose the restroom of your choice. Well, I think we've all been sincere, but sincerely wrong. And this measure of sincerity, it just doesn't seem to make good law. If they're sincere about something, then it's okay. That seems
Well,
to
to
be
make a
little
funny
troubling.
scenario, okay, it's Gillette Stadium. The women's line is how long, and the men's line is considerably shorter. If I'm feeling
Like a man.
sporty, Joan may decide to walk into the men's restroom and go, "My name is Charles," and if someone challenges me, I have a sincerely held belief. Excuse me now while I go use the stall.
Yeah.
And while my girlfriends are standing out in the queue still, waiting to use the restroom at Gillette Stadium, I'll be back in the stands watching the game, happy as a clam with an empty bladder. Lovely. Lovely for me. But that's how it can be misused and misconstrued. Now, I'm not trying to cause anyone harm. I'm just trying to cut the queue that exists in my own gender for my own bathroom. But wow, what a great way.
But that still doesn't mean you didn't make anybody uncomfortable.
I might have, who knows?
You know?
All that depends on what stall I chose.
Yeah.
Me, well, women, you always look for the cleanest one. I could go 32 stalls till I find the stall of my dreams. Meanwhile, there's all those urinals as well, too. So you're right, there's 31 men I could potentially make feel acutely uncomfortable.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, all kidding aside, I did that in jest, but to prove the
Oh,
point.
absolutely, yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
think, it's good to start thinking about it. And I think, Deedee, your point was well taken. You speak to everybody about this issue when you're collecting signatures and also in your social media endeavors in your hometown of Billerica and then also in Falmouth. And I think it's good because I think fundamentally what's been happening in our society is we're not talking
Right.
respectfully and appropriately to one another. I want to hear everybody's opinion. Doesn't mean I'm
Absolutely.
going to be lockstep with you on everything, and some things we'll agree about and some things we'll disagree about. But let's have the robust discussion, and let's not be labeling individuals as bigots or racists for having a certain opinion or caring about safety or some things like that.
And that's
So-
the most disheartening thing about this is because people do want to label. I mean, you can tell. You can tell we're not mean people. I mean, I don't kill bugs. I save worms. I mean,
Spiders get in my house. Spiders get in my house. They may regret it.
See, I'm okay with spiders, but oh my God, I had a little ant problem when I first moved. Never mind.
and I know we're laughing,
Didn't
but
go well for the
that's
ants.
the thing is that it's so
Yeah.
automatic to want to assume that we are being bigoted or we are being transphobic or whatever the word of the day is. And that's simply not true because our concern and compassion is for everybody in the state of
But that's what
Massachusetts.
they throw at us. If we disagree with the law, they
Right.
throw that at us.
That's
We're
what some
anti,
people
we're
throw.
bigot.
Yeah.
Then you just.
I think the agenda people throw.
Well, but
they
people
really
could
don't
turn
care
around and
about
watch the
us.
show and say, "Oh, the people on the stage have an agenda too." Let's get away from labels. Labels are for jars, and I think sometimes when we put labels on things, it short circuits the conversation and it makes it more reactionary and more divisive in the first instance.
Well, and sometimes that's
Let's
a strategy.
lose the labels. Oh, sure. And the
Yeah.
other thing is, it's modern times. We make snap decisions all the time. You sit there with your cell phone for the 8 minutes that it takes before you get to the cashier at the checkout, and you're like, making executive decisions as to what messages you want to return, what you are deleting, and what you're going to archive. And we all are the own CEO of our life, and I think sometimes labeling things and judging things allows us to get through our mental process a little bit faster. But we lose something in that. We lose the humanity, and that's important. I think it's something that we need to acknowledge, and I think it's something we need to discuss, and it's something that collectively we can all work on in our respective communities and spheres of influences to change.
Yes, yeah, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to educate people because people don't know this law exists. They don't know it's in place. They don't know that it's a ballot question, or they don't understand the ballot question. And we need we want them to understand that our issue is safety and privacy. And we would love for people to donate to our campaigns or get involved with our campaigns, tell their friends and their family members.
How and where can they donate?
Okay, so where's your website?
Okay, our website is www.keepmasafe.org.
Could we get that up on the screen? Could we put that up? Well, hopefully we can.
Yes.
We have a few minutes left, so what if we discuss what's our probability? Do you think we can get this passed?
Our numbers look very, very good, because if people understand the issue, it's about educating people as to what this is and the dangers it poses. And so once people understand the law, they don't like the law. And so we think our chances are very, very good.
But our job is an educational one, to let them
Yes.
know what the law really is
Yes.
and what the ramifications are today.
Yes. Yeah, one of the situations occurred down it was the end of last year, and it was in a spa on the South Shore. And a customer called in and made an appointment for services. He wanted nails, manicure, pedicure, and then I don't know I'm not sure the term, waxing. He wanted waxing, from his face and his chest and all the way down to his toes. And that included, and then it turned out when he came for the appointment that he was still a biological man. And they had evidently canceled his appointment before he came. There was a weather issue or something, and so they said, well, we don't do men, and not for the manicure and the pedicure, but for the bikini wax on his genitals. And so he initially filed a civil lawsuit against the owner of this spa and withdrew it. It's not real good for their advertising that they're trying to do, that this is discrimination. And but those are the kinds of issues that businesses face. Why should any woman run the risk of losing her job because she declines to do this service for a biological man?
And women's shelters too, that's another thing that has come up and about in
Women's
discussion.
shelters been impacted by this?
Yes,
Could you give us an example of that?
Yeah.
There was a situation in Boston where a man was inside, and
Would you mind saying where, or?
in Boston, I don't know which.
Women's shelter
A
in
women's
Boston.
shelter in Boston. Yeah, I don't know which women's shelter it was, but evidently a woman was very uncomfortable, and they called the police, and the police ended up having to pay. The police department was sued, and they ended up having to pay. I believe it was a $20,000 fine.
Or settlement or judgment.
But again, you go back into women's safety's issue. When they're fleeing usually to a homeless shelter, they're fleeing some sort of abuse. And they need to feel safe. They need to feel like their body is going to be safe and protected. And then if, a man is there and they're having to share space with them, what happens to those women,
Women who go to women's shelters, sometimes they're fleeing an abusive relationship, but sometimes
Exactly.
they could also be truly homeless.
Right.
And often those women that are going to the women's shelters that are homeless are bringing their children in tow.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so to have someone who could walk in and present or attempt to present and say that they were transgendered when in fact they're clearly not, to be into that, talk about a fox in the hen house. That's horrifying, because particularly too in shelters, it's nighttime, it's sleep. Lights are low or off, and
exactly.
people are supposed to be sleeping for 6 or 8 hours.
Yeah.
That allows someone who would be potential sexual predator to have access to women and children for the evening. How
Exactly.
horrifying.
Yeah.
And especially if they were trying to escape an
A
abusive
difficult
situation in the first place.
yeah, to begin with. Yeah, so there's a lot of things. And again, it goes back to there's many facets, and whoever's listening, if they've just keyed on one thing that they don't like, vote no. You don't have to take all of the issues that we've presented and think
Right.
they're a problem, but if there's just one thing, if you think that a woman having to do a bikini wax on somebody she's uncomfortable with doing is enough to make you vote no, then vote no. I do not like this law. This should not be included. So I mean, there's so many areas that, you might agree with one thing we've mentioned, or you might agree with all of it. So either
Or
way,
basically just decide to the state legislature, listen, you put too much into this and you didn't put enough thought into it. Do it over.
it was done so
Do
quickly.
it over.
Yeah.
Do it over.
And
You
even-
didn't allow for, you didn't put enough forethought into.
Or compromise.
Exactly. So this is, this is, like we've all had that scenario as a student. You turn in your paper, you turn in your homework, and you're just like, no, this isn't your best effort, Joan. Do it over.
Yeah.
Maybe that was just my elementary school nuns. Like, Sisters of Notre Dame, Joan, do it over.
Do it again,
This is not
yeah.
your best work, dear. And and so it's nothing wrong for us
look
as
at where it
voters to
got
say.
you. You're a
And there's
successful
nothing wrong
lawyer.
for us to say, oh,
If you don't mind me also saying that even if we just outright repeal it, we're not talking about a huge change in the law.
No.
We're just going back to a 2010 law,
Right.
which prohibits discrimination.
Exactly.
So there are major ramifications if this does stay in place, but not that big a deal if it's repealed.
I agree
And
with
we
you.
don't
Because
want there
it's
to
what-
be
it's a
one
sense of the community
incident
that-
where someone is really harmed. I mean, it's emotional damage that you do to women and children, but the potential for real danger is real.
for physical harm as well.
It's
Okay.
real.
It's
We have about 30 seconds left, so what if just one more time you tell people why they should be in favor of this and who to contact?
What's your elevator pitch? Okay, we're going to give Deedee 30 seconds to think about her. So
No, I don't like elevators. I'm not
You
doing
only
it.
have 30
She's the
seconds
staircase lady. All right, well, that's not going to help.
I believe that the primary responsibility of government is to provide safety for its citizens, and they have failed the citizens of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And we need to therefore get involved, educate ourselves and our friends, our neighbors, and vote no to repeal this very dangerous law.
Vote no on 3.
No on 3.
Ditto.
And who to contact, and is there a phone number?
No.
Website, just
You
the
can
website.
contact us through the website, www.keepmasafe.org.
I thank you very much
Thank you.
for being
Thank
with
you.
us.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you both for
Thanks.
being with us tonight and helping to educate the public regarding
Very
some of these questions.
intriguing conversation.
Thank you very much
Thank
again.
you.
Yeah.
Merited discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That's
Thanks very
nice.
much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Deedee.
And I hope we got some questions answered tonight for our ride in November. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
Good night.
Good night.